All right. Good evening. It is so good to see you all. My name is Amy Ezel, and I am the Director of Communication and Congregational Vitality for the Arkansas Conference of the United Methodist Church. And I am so glad that you all could be here this evening, and hope you're ready to dig into more simplified structure. And I am tickled to I am the host now. Thank you, Blake. I am tickled to be able to introduce y'all. I'm sure most of you already know Reverend Dr. Blake Bradford, whether he has been your pastor, whether he has been your district superintendent, whether he is just your friend. But we are tickled to have him tonight. He has written several books on uh, and they're right in front of you, as you can see, on the simplified structure and the mission possibles for the small church, as well as just the mission possible, which there is a third edition. And let me know if you would like to purchase either of these books. I have some for sale, and also Blake has some for sale. So if you would like to purchase any for your team, let either of us know, and we'll be glad to get that taken care of for you. But just a little housekeeping tonight. Blake, can you tell us, do you want people to ask questions as we go, or do you want them to hold until you pause?
I'll tell you what, here's what we'll do. I think the best thing for it is put questions in the chat as you have them. And then I will be pausing here and there throughout, and then we'll kind of see where we are, and we'll take voice questions and stuff like that. And then what I found is at the very end, I'll stop the recording, and those that were like, there is no way I'm speaking until the recording, for those folks, I'll hang around for a while, as long as y'all kind of need me, and I can answer some questions.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you for hosting and inviting me to be a part of this. Thank you. So, hey, friends, it's great to be with you. And let me see, I'm gonna do just a couple of kind of housekeeping pieces. There we go. So this is the My Job workshop for the Simplified Leadership Board. Now, I am making some assumptions that I know are already incorrect. And so let me tell you the first assumption. My first assumption on this is you already have this system in place, and this is a refresher for new leaders. Now, I know that's actually not true, because some of y'all are here because you just want to find out more about how to do a simplified leadership board, and that's totally cool. But I want you to know that I haven't built in some of the discernment pieces into this presentation. I have those. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link here in the chat, and all the links that I'm going to send you, we're going to be making available this video and making available this PowerPoint show and all this that I have. It's just going to be available to whoever wants it. But the link I have here has videos that I did for discipleship ministries, our General Board Discipleship United Methodist Church. I did a 2-set video, and it goes through all the why answers and the discernment period. And if you're contemplating moving into this model, and it's a 2-video set that I did with DM, and that might be good to share with folks if you're exploring the idea of a simplified leadership board. Again, tonight's going to be more for more the user's manual rather than the sales manual. I'll put it that way. And so that link there has links to those videos and also to the books, things like that. And just so you know, as I said, I've already actually put this whole slideshow you're about to see, because I know I've been in meetings where I've been like trying to take notes or like taking a photograph of the screen. Let me just tell you, all the slides are already online. The link I just gave you, you can download them, and you have all the slides. And those are yours, and you can use them as you need to in your local church. So they're yours, our gift to you. So that kind of out of the way, let me do a quick refresher of where we are on this. Several years ago, now about 10, 15 years ago, churches started exploring different models of doing leadership and governance in their local church. What they were seeing is that the size and scope of the ministries, maybe the membership size in some cases, the general workflow of how churches get ministry done and how you vision and plan, it did not seem to be working for their congregation to have all the multiple committees for one reason or another. And for several different reasons, folks started exploring different ways to have a single board and a simplified system. And out of that exploration, a couple different models started cropping up, particularly in Missouri with the Healthy Church Initiative. And my co-author and I, Kay Cotan, Kay started working on simplified structure, and then we started teaming up on this. And we started concentrating on a certain model that we made sure fit the discipline well. And so we followed the discipline. The book discipline, our polity rule book for the United Methodist Church. We made sure it followed that, and it also it felt like it felt appropriate to our culture as United Methodist. And the most important thing is we wanted to make sure that authority and responsibility were married together in what is called accountable leadership. So it's not just about simplifying the government; it's simplified accountable leadership. And this is all allowed under paragraph 247.2, where we're allowed to modify the organizational plans. And if you notice the underline, it says there with the consultation with and approval of the DS. Both those steps are required, especially in the Arkansas conference. We expect people to have that conversation. And before you move into it, we need to have a talk, because it's not just, hey, let's have less people around the table. Yeah, one could do that, and it might really blow up in your face, because we recognize that when you simplify, it's like moving from a hatchet to a chainsaw. And if you ever started grabbing a chainsaw, you don't use a hatchet and chainsaw exactly the same. And if you're not careful, you'll hurt yourself, because it moves a lot faster, and you just got to be safe. It's not that it's a bad tool, it's just that you need to use it correctly. And so we need to talk about that if you're wanting to shift into that model. So to remind ourselves again, because I'm working under the assumption y'all have this model. Let me show you the oh, come on, there we go. Oh, it decided to, there we are. If you imagine our structure here, you have the charge conference. It's what relates to the annual conference. Yeah, just at the top, because remember, the whole plan is not to make members happy. It's to follow the mission, the Great Commission that God's given us to make disciples of Jesus Christ. Your charge conference is there. It is the main leadership body. It votes on stuff. But as we know, charge conference isn't meeting every month and deciding on ministry plans, right? What they need is an executive committee. And in a simplified accountable structure, that would be that leadership board, which I have colored in purple. And the leadership board is the church council and the trustees and the staff parish and the finance committee. It's all of these simultaneously. Now, that's why I never like it when anyone says, oh, we got rid of our finance committee. We got rid of our staff parish. No, you didn't. You kept it. You just kept it all together under this one leadership board, one group that does all that work. And you see here, there's still a nominations committee. And you see also, if you notice here below the pastor piece, is there's still ministry teams. If you move to simplified accountable structure and you go, oh, we're a one board structure, we got rid of our worship committee, we got rid of our outreach, and we got rid, no. You want to keep your ministry teams. But ministry teams they don't have to be elected. They can be selected. They can be chosen based upon giftedness and passion and calling. And, my wife, for example, she's great with children's ministry. She doesn't want to be elected to be in children's ministry. She's great at children's ministry. And when our kids grew up and were in youth, guess what ministry she was involved in? Children's ministry, because that's her calling. Same thing here. You keep your ministry teams, but you condense together all the governance functions. And in this model, you have 6 to 9 members elected by the charge conference. Now, in smaller churches, you can do 6. A little bit larger churches, you need to get up to 9. There's technically a way to make it 11, but that's a little squirrely, and you need to probably have a conversation with me on how that happens because it's a little squirrely. Just kind of going with me here. But just imagine 6 to 9, and that 6 to 9 includes your board chair, includes your lay member of the annual conference, your lay leader. It they're since they're trustees, they need to be 18. If you have someone under 18, they can't be a trustee, so they just you kind of indicate that. Um, you notice these jobs can be combined, like your chair can also be your lay member of annual conference and your lay leader if you wanted to. Uh, the nominating committee is still required because nominating committee is chaired by the pastor and the treasurer, financial secretary. Now, here's the thing about those. We often put those on the board because that's just the way it's always been. But in reality, the treasurer and the finance secretary are functional positions. They do ministry jobs. One of them is accounts receivable. That's the finance secretary. The other one is accounts payable. That's the treasurer. There's no particular reason your accounts receivable and your accounts payable need to be on your board. Certainly not just because that's their job. Now, if Bob Smith is your treasurer, but he's also a great church member with visionary leadership, and he needs to be on the board. Great, have him on the board, but don't have him on the board because he's a treasurer, because he'll rotate off. And so think of the treasurer and financial secretary. They may be paid or unpaid staff positions. Now, these small churches, I don't have a staff position. Well, think of it as an unpaid staff position. And that means they may be doing it for a long time, like 30 years doing the money. That's great. But they don't need to be voting on the board just because they can count money and they can do a spreadsheet. I'm a humanities major, not a math major, but you get the idea. I mean, you don't need to have someone just because they're good at math be on your board. You have them report to the board, but they don't need to be on the board as voting members. So that's that structure there. And the other piece I wanted to share, and some of you, this is redo. You're going, oh, Blake, I've heard this before, and yes, but hang in with me. We're going to get into some work about like wearing these different hats. But the way that this is should be understood is, as a one board, really what you're doing is imagine yourself, everyone around the table has 4 hats in front of them. And they switch hats based upon as you go through the agenda. And it's like, okay, we're going to talk about the budget. Everybody put on your finance hat. So everyone just grabs the finance hat they have in front of them and put it on their head. Okay, we're going to talk about our endowments. Okay, trustee hat. Okay, everyone, we need to talk about a report that we have to talk about, let me think, personnel policy. Let's put on staff parish hat. Oh, we need to fill out that form for the DS about the pastor in consultation. Oh, let's move to executive session. If you're not on the board, you need to step out. We're in executive session. Now that it's confidential in the executive session, everyone put on your staff parish hat. Now, when I first did this, I didn't have multicolored images for hats. I used theme hats. And my co-author, Kay, she made me stop, I think. I think she thought I was a little goofy. But for finance, I had like a banker shade, and trustees, I had a hard hat. And for staff parish, I had a Roman centurion battle helmet. That's a joke. You can't laugh. Okay. So, if you've been on staff parish, you know what I'm talking about, right? I'm just joking. So you get the idea. You imagine you have different hats. Now, in this, there is a tendency, and I understand we used to teach it this way. We stopped several years ago, but a lot of people inherited it. And that is, it feels really natural to go, oh, there's 9 of us on the board. What would happen if 3 of us were the trustees and 3 of us were finance? And it seems so natural to want to do it. Don't fall into that trap. Don't do it. Don't do it. Because here's the problem. Once you start doing that, you've lost all you've gained from having this leadership board that's combined and cohesive. You've siloed and broken it up again. And you've done it in a way that makes it less effective, because a real finance committee, it has maybe a dozen members on it. A real staff parish has 5 to 11 people on it. If you just have 3 people, it'd be real easy for three people to have an idea, go, yeah, we need to move that preacher. And the whole board hadn't even talked about it. And another conference, that actually happened. They had these kind of representatives or specialists, and the three people that were the so-called personnel or staff parish, they turned in a report to the DS without asking the rest of the board. And they said, we want our pastor moved. And the DS moved the pastor, and the rest of the board was angry. Why did you do that? You told me. And they turned to those three people and they said, well, we thought that's the best. Oh no. So anyway, don't do it. Keep a cohesive board. And there's not just a trustee on the board either. Like one person's a trust. No, all 9 are trustees. All 9 are the finance committee. All 9 are the staff parish. All 9 are the church council or the ad council. And you just call yourself as a whole the leadership board. Now, the image of these hats really becomes powerful and effective. And I know I just used the example of switching hats. The best thing is when you get really good at it, you don't even feel like you're switching hats. You have your multicolored hat. And so I've got my multicolored hat here, and some of you have seen me wear this thing. And so I've got my multicolored hat. And that means I've got all the hats I'm wearing. Here I'm a staff parish committee. I am a trustee. I'm a church council. I'm doing all the jobs at once. And I got the propeller here, right? That's to remind me that I don't need to get stuck in managing and all the muck of the details. I work with the pastor and other ministry teams because I need to. And I'm like, here, I'm gonna spin my little hat here. I need to move up to 30,000 feet so I can get a big picture. I need to be looking out and going, what's going on in the community? What's going on in our neighborhood? What's going on with the local school and local nonprofits? What's going on with the unhomed community? And that is our neighbors that are homeless. Well, what's going on with folks that we never see in church? What's going on in the long range culture and sustainable future of our congregation and our long range plans for our facility and how we're going to use it. We got to move to the balcony, and that means you got to get out of some of that day to day and think big picture. And get up there 30,000 foot, and so you have your propeller. So that's the idea of when a leadership board is able to use that authority they're given and that responsibility to its best. And so I want to encourage y'all to move to that place where you're able to wear all the hats simultaneously. Now, that being said, I'm going to kind of skip some of these. Of course, at times you're going to have your board have projects you're going to work on. And so, for example, you have an annual budget coming up. Well, what you can do then is point to a couple people or maybe one person on your board and say, hey, Susan, I need you to grab a few folks, the pastor, maybe if you have some special staff persons, maybe someone that is good with math, maybe some folks that are doing some different ministries, and come up with a draft budget and bring it back to us. And notice that means you can expand who does inputs. If I was going to say, hey, we need to learn about our neighborhood as a board, I may say, hey, can a couple of y'all team up and get some people in the church? And maybe imagine this, some people in our community that aren't even members, and get an idea not only of the demographics, but what's going on in the community, and maybe do interviews or conversations or work with the local and come back to us with sort of a draft statement that we can then process. Or what if we have a personnel policy? You can send someone out to work on that and bring it back. So the work teams enable you to use, for example, the giftedness of the mature saint who doesn't want to do 3-year terms anymore, but wouldn't mind doing a month or two of help, or maybe someone brand new in the life of the church that, they're not ready to jump on a committee just yet. Maybe next time, but I tell you what, they know some stuff and they have some fresh eyes. So you can team up with them and maybe they'll learn a little bit about leadership. And so you may actually involve a much larger number than your 9 involved in leadership, but that doesn't mean they all have to be voting people who have 3-year terms, because you use the power of work teams. And that's how you do drafts. You bring those drafts to the board, and the board then does the conversation and the voting they may need to do. When we talk about accountable leadership, the idea then is that everyone is holding someone else accountable. The leadership board, it's held accountable to the Great Commission and the mission of the church to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And the whole church needs to hold them accountable to that vision. The board should hold the pastor accountable. The pastor should hold any staff accountable. I encourage a leadership covenant, and I have a sample of that in this book about the small church. And there may even be some copies online. I can't remember, but I have a leadership covenant about how you work with one another. We also suggest guiding principles so you don't keep on making the same decision. And there's some examples of that on that website too that I sent you. And I'm about to hit a pause here in just a second, and then I'll do some questions. So the other thing I wanted to go before we kind of get to Q&A time is, I said at the first of this that, that difference between governance and ministry. You have your board, which has the role of staff parish and finance and church council and trustees. Think of them as a steering group. Their hands are on the handlebars. Their job is kind of where you going. All your ministries are pedaling. They're mobilization. And so they're pedaling, they're moving the bike, the direction the steering group says to go. Now, if you just had pedals, you wouldn't go anywhere. You'd go, but you might go into the ditch. If you have steering, you may be perfectly steered, but guess what? You're standing still. So you need both. You need both ministry teams and the board that has with voting and steering and does that, again, propeller, get in the air, take a big look at things. So that bicycle is a good way to keep the different jobs separate. And I've even heard of churches that bring in a kid's bike and they just put it on a table just as they're trying to unpack that, because I know it's so easy for your governance committee to get into management, to start saying, hey, and they start planning these ministries and they think, whoa, and no one says, whoa, that's pedaling. Let's let the feet be on the pedals. We're in charge of the handlebars. So let's separate these responsibilities appropriately. Now, I know in small churches, I get it. You're pedaling and steering. The challenge for y'all will be, let's be sure to stay in one lane at a time. So when you move into your board meeting, keep our hands on the handlebars. And then I know, yes, you also teach Sunday school. You also are running the food pantry, and you're also singing in the choir. I get it. But let's keep that work separate. And let your board meeting be your board meeting. You adjourn, and then if you need to talk about ministry, you do a ministry team, But try to keep that stuff separate, because once it starts getting all mixed up, it gets really hard to do accountability, which is a whole nother conversation, frankly. So let me take a pause here, because you just got 2 hours worth of intro all at once. I see a question about how do you define ministry? Is it things outside the church or anything that benefits the church? Okay, I'll say this. It's both. When I'm talking about ministry, I'm talking about that pedaling. So some ministry is happening outside the church. In fact, I wish more of it was. That's doing discipleship, it's doing outreach, it's doing connections ministry, it's doing food pantries, it's doing tutoring in your local school, it's doing funeral work for the bereavement. It's also singing in the choir. It's also teaching Sunday school and working in the nursery. I think all that falls under ministry. And again, we're trying to keep governance stuff doing governance work and ministry doing ministry work. And the job of the pastor is to be overseeing these ministries, and they're held accountable by the board. And there should be a reporting system up and down the system and evaluation on that. So I'll get into some of that more, but that's one question that was being asked. What are the questions? And you can do them verbal too. You can just unmute and feel free to ask. Okay, I'm not. Oh, is there a role? What's the role of the DS? Excellent. So the district superintendent, not only do we need to do some approval process to move into this system, the other piece is the board, since they wear the staff parish hat, may at times be called to session by the superintendent. We need to talk about things like maybe there's a new pastor expected or something like that, or need to have a conversation, or maybe an intervention of some kind. So I, as a superintendent, will work with your leadership board, and whenever I work with that leadership board, it is serving under the staff parish auspices, which means it's an executive session. When I say executive session, that means they're meeting and it's confidential. I see a question: what's the role of the bishop? The bishop, I mean, we report to the bishop, of course. Now, this again is local church simplified structure. There are models for both the district, and we use a district simplified structure. And some conferences are even exploring a simplified structure at the conference level. There's been some real neat experiments. I'm actually working with 3 conferences right now on that. So yeah, so I think the tools we're learning at local churches about going simplified, that's being the joys and the benefits of that we're seeing at all levels of the church. Okay. Oh, I see another question. The role of the pastor on the board. Great, that's a great one. So I have the pastor there. If you see, there's an accountability officer with ministries. The pastor has a vote unless it's a trustee thing, because the pastor's not a trustee. And the pastor and the board need to be partners in ministry. The pastor and the board are partners in ministry. So the pastor, for most things, has a vote. But I'm not real hung up on votes. I'll just tell you, I've served in ministry a lot of years now. I rarely vote. I figure I have a pretty big voice, especially if I'm preaching every Sunday. I don't need to vote too much. And if my vote was the deciding vote on something really divisive, then we need to have probably more prayer and conversation before, if I was the deciding vote, I wouldn't feel terribly hot about that. So, there maybe need to be more talk, and that's good. I think that the role of the pastor, I think that ministry covenant, that will be a piece that will be important, especially as you've placed a lot of responsibility on this board. I think that it'd be really easy for that board to be overwhelmed by it. So they need to, do the work well, and they need to learn how to communicate with the pastor. And part of having a board covenant is communicating well with the pastor. And so the pastor and board are those partners that are having the right conversations. And what I mean by that is, if the pastor is getting sideswiped by a critique or something like that, whoa, or unofficial secret, kind of anonymous information and all that. Oh, we need to clean up the communication channels in that case. So now, that all being said, you'll see a strain throughout this book and some of the work, and that is we spend a lot more time talking about the work of the laity than the work of the pastor. And the reason is, and it was kind of a piece of why I wrote Impact about the called lay ministry. I'm one of my beliefs is, and this is opinion, Blake, not DS Blake, is that churches have gotten way too pastor centric, and I think we need a good balanced teamwork between pastors and laity, because the more professionalized pastor thing, I think it can be distracting from our larger mission. So I want partnerships that are healthy, and so that's part of what you'll see here is doing accountable partnerships where everyone is holding each other accountable. And I see a question: when everyone's wearing all the hats, how do we stay accountable? I'm going to talk to you about that. I will answer that question. Okay. Now let's unpack some of that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of the hats. Now, if you attended some of the seminars that in Northwest District that I did earlier this week, you've actually seen some of this material. But here it is. But I designed that other material to say, oh, we have a finance committee, we have a church council, separate committees. Here, remember, we're wearing all the hats. And so you have to be able to say, okay, as I'm wearing all the hats, then let's talk about how we go about doing that. Um, and first of all, the first hat I'm going to talk about is church council. The church council is the executive committee of the church conference. It one of the jobs it has is like a traffic light. You know, there's a lot of things coming. Which side needs to go? Which side may need to pause? And a question that often pops up is, how does a single board cover the work of 4 committees? Because we're meeting like an hour, hour and a half in each of these committees every month. How does it get done in one meeting? Well, here's how. The leadership board doesn't deal in isolation with every item. First of all, think about this. Think of how much work it takes to make one decision in a church with a traditional structure. You know, you have someone comes to the board with an idea, you go, oh, okay, well, that's a great idea, but before we decide on it, you need to talk to finance committee, and you talk to finance, and then they say, oh, well, you need to talk to trustees because you want to use the building, so you have to talk to trustees. Then you have to talk, oh, what about the staff? Have you talked about how staff? Oh, talk to staff pairs. By the time you're done, you know, you've gone through multiple committees. So bringing it all together means you get to have the conversation just once. But here's the thing. You don't need to be having every one of these conversations every time. What you need to do is have a permission giving culture set up. You set up some guiding principles and policies. So if you think about the guiding principles of the fencing and the field line markings here, you set up some basic things. Like, for instance, talk about facility use. I know churches that if everybody that, you know, they have a great facility, they get called, hey, can we use your facility? And they write them down. Use the facility, write them down. And they have this big old stack of requests to use the facility. And they bring it into the board meeting and they have to go one at a time. Well, guiding principles you set up, and you can, these are living, this is a living document, says that the admin who picks up the phone and takes the call can just say yes if it fits certain standards. And if it doesn't, it's put in another stack and needs another conversation. Another guiding principle is how money is used. For example, you can set spending limits. And so, you know, the admin or the pastor or the ministry director, if they have a budget, can spend up to a certain amount without asking permission. Set up another amount, they need to get maybe the pastor or the treasurer or something, you know, and then up to a certain amount, oh, we need the board to have a conversation, or it needs bids or something like that. So you can set up markers that fit the size and budget of your church in the guiding principles. That way, you don't need like someone to come to your church, your council, and say, hey, I'd like to spend $50 on something. If you've already got it approved, it's in the budget, and it's under whatever spending limits you have for certain tiers, it can be just done. No one needs to wait. You don't need to have a 30-minute conversation around $50. And so setting up these guiding principles means you're passing off responsibility and letting it just be done at that local level. Okay. Now, yeah. So I'm just sort of looking at my chat window here. There's a couple different questions. I'm going to come to some of those in a bit because I don't want to get off topic. So here's some examples of guiding principles: purchasing limits, service contracts. You need to have one for hiring and termination and discipline of staff. For example, some churches, they say, you know, pastor's head of staff, they can do what they want. Others are, yeah, for, you know, anybody at the, you know, the coordinator or this certain tier, it can be the pastor, like a nursery worker or something like that. But at this tier of full-time worker, we need to be involved in the decision as a board. And it may be we need you to just talk to the chair. Or it may be we need to have the conversation and we want a board member and the pastor to have that disciplined conversation together. Every church's culture is a little different. I really don't care which one you want to use, but the difference is you need to write down which one you use. You'd be maybe not so surprised how often a misunderstanding about who has what authority ends up blowing up. The pastor thinks they have a certain level of authority. The board had a different image. The pastor does something, they're mad at the pastor now. It's like, whoa, I thought that was the rules. Well, it wasn't written down. So, setting that up ahead of time allows, and if you have a multi-tiered staff, you could give certain level to directors and certain level to pastor and certain level that if it involves the director, the board needs to be involved. Or, I mean, you can set up that and just have it written down. Here's the rules. Another one's credit card policies. I had a church that we loaned out our tables. That's fine, but I don't need everybody that needs to borrow the tables to come and have a conversation with the board, right? We just need a system in place. Now, now another piece I talked about was a leadership covenant. I've got some examples in the book. I can send you some more if you wish. Happy to share it. Here's what I'll say about the leadership covenant. It talks about how we work with each other. Expectations on being present, expectations on being following up as disciple, expectations that if you hear something about the pastor or someone's mad, that you're expected as a board member to have a certain kind of conversation. All that is important stuff. And there's some good covenant models you can use to make it clear what the expectations are. The idea of having in a covenant means that it doesn't mean it just have to be just the pastor or something like that. The board holds each other accountable to the covenant. You all read it, you all signed it. In nominations, you can say, hey, by the way, if you want to be a part of this team, here's our leadership covenant. Now we'll tweak it with new people every year, but you need to see this is the expectation. And then you can have those expectations. They've signed it. It's a lot easier to hold people accountable if it's there written down. What we don't need is you just say, hey, pastor, will you make sure that other board members held accountable? That's not helpful, right? Laity need to hold each other accountable on that. And so that's a model for that can, in addition to the guiding principles, I suggest you have that kind of leadership covenant. Now, another way that you make this work is you have a leadership packet. And my suggestion is that this is done about a week ahead of time. You put in your agenda, you put in any kind of vital signs, guest information on smaller or mid-sized churches, any kind of goals, any kind of questions the ministry team has, or maybe there's bids or something like that, any drafts. Put all that in a packet ahead of time. Get it out. Maybe it's on Sunday. They can pick it up in the back, whatever, get their folder. And the expectation in the covenant is everyone's read everything. And then when you come to the meeting, you're able to talk about it. And this is, I know that y'all never experienced this, but I've been guilty of this. I have a meeting, and what do? I've got 30, 40 pieces of paper, budgets and all that. And they're in the back of the room on a table in little stacks. And everyone they come in and they grab one of each and they sit down. And you can't even say hi because you're thumbing through 40 pieces of paper. And whoever reads first wins because no one's read any of this. It makes a really less fruitful meeting. Once everyone's read it, you can just move forward. And that is one of the ways you move forward in the meeting. I suggest a template agenda where you kind of separate some stuff out. You do your fiduciary work like budgets and stuff. You can talk about pressing issues. You at the end you have an executive session used for pastor parish or for legal work. Another suggestion I have is close every meeting with communications planning assignment. Like, okay, before we leave, who had what job, and have it written down. And what do we need to tell the congregation? We just met for an hour. We voted on a lot of stuff. We agreed to some stuff. Who's going to write the newsletter article this week for the e-news about what the board decided? Oh, and this one decision is really big. It may even need a pulpit assignment or a big article in the newsletter. So you close your meeting with that kind of communication. Notice also every meeting have spiritual formation, leadership development. because it's a kind of a love, learn, lead model of moving forward. I also, and again, these slides are all online downloadable. There's some time if you plan ahead, you can kind of work through the whole year and have some, okay, you know, the old parable about, you know, you put the big rocks in first and then you put the small rocks and that's how you can fill it up. These would be like the big rocks. Here's the big things we need to make sure we talk about these months. And once we have that in mind, then it's a lot easier to add the other stuff. And you have this rhythm to the year. And again, that board communication. You've just taken 4 committees, trustees, finance, staff, parish council. You consolidate them into one. That means to stay even on the amount of communication you need to do, you've got to quadruple it just to keep up with what you used to have in the level of communication. And that's like a lot of communication, right? But you got to do it. If not, your board is going to feel more and more distant and separated from the rest. You're spending a lot of time together in the board. You'll feel like foreigners to your church if you don't do ongoing two-way communication. That includes things like town halls, maybe Zooms with the congregation, maybe table gatherings at a couple times a year, stuff like that. Now, there's also the staff parish chat. And after this, I'm going to take a little another question break. On the staff parish hat, you notice here, when you're wearing that hat, your board has all these responsibilities. That's a lot of stuff. Clergy comp, fiduciary compliance with things like child protection stuff, doing evals for the DS. I mean, we're always asking for some form or another, right? Doing goal setting and helping the pastor be accountable to goals, and assisting the pastor, keeping ministry teams going on their goals. Maybe if you have multiple staff, that can be pretty involved. If you have a whole lot of staff, you may need a team to just work with the pastor around just personnel matters, like a work team. And that's fine too. You know, there's some creative ways you can handle this in larger churches. Again, when you move to staff parish work, it's executive session. It's confidential. And I'll give you an example, filling out the eval forms and the consultation. So that means the whole leadership team has to be involved in filling out those forms, the entire leadership team. Now, may have one group do a first draft and do a few answers, but you don't need to be very far along in that conversation. And here's why. The discipline requires the pastor be present when you're operating as staff parish. That is a discipline rule. The only exception is if the DS is there. And then under that staff parish, if you're operating when you wear your staff parish hat, pastor DS needs to be in the room. And let me just put it this way. I'm a fan, and I've done this most of my ministry. I often voluntarily step out of the room and let a little bit of work done when it comes to eval, and then I come back in and we need to have a full conversation. And that's great. I mean, to do it that way. But the pastor doesn't have to leave if they want to. The other thing is, you don't want just a couple of people on the board to be filling out anything on the pastor. It needs to be a whole board decision. All 9 people get voice and vote in that process, because to do otherwise is not fair to the pastor or to the whole church. So when you're wearing that staff parish hat, remember there's certain disciplinary rules that you must follow. I also need to remind you that when you're operating this way, that you need to be really constructive in your feedback and talk and be really clear about what you're trying to accomplish as staff parish, and what your processes and things like that. You know, staff parish, when you're wearing that staff parish hat, you're not just looking around for problems and clobbering the preacher with it or anything like that. You need to frame a process that's good and clean. And when it comes to things like evaluations, if you're doing annual evaluations for staff or pastor, really, frankly, no one should ever be surprised by an evaluation. If you get to evaluation and they're surprised, by something you're telling them, that probably means you haven't been doing enough communication all year long. And so there's some things here I wrote just to remind yourselves that when you're in that executive session with that staff parish hat on, there's some items I encourage you to keep on thinking of. I also have some things about these guiding principles and things like that listed on these slides. Again, the whole idea of having a covenant guiding principles is to set up the boundaries, the fence, the lines on the playing field, so everything's fair and everything stays safe. You don't want to be playing ball, and if there's no fence, that ball will drift out in the middle of the road and you'll get run over, right? So you need to keep things safe by having clear boundaries. And again, all 9, I'm assuming a 9-person board, all 9 are the staff parish. All 9 are trustees, all 9. And so don't fraction out. Okay, I'm going to pause here and see. I have a few questions. How to stay accountable for getting things done. I think using those guiding principles is a big part. Not having to make the same decision 20 times, make the decision once. And if it's a good guiding principle, just add it to the list so you don't have to make it again and again and again. If the board doesn't want to keep the covenant, man, then you need to have a real hard talk about, is this model right for you? Simplified accountable leadership requires the middle word, accountable. If the church is not willing to hold itself accountable, then you have bigger problems than what your committee structure is. And I would rather a church move back to the multi-committee model, because that has a lot of accountability in it too. But because it's like, you might not be able to handle a chainsaw. You might want to use a hatchet because you need to build up some more trust and accountability in the system. That's fair. And then you need to work on your leadership accountability before you do simplified versions of it. I see some folks had different kind of structures. These structures I'm sharing follow the discipline. You think it follows it in a real creative way, but it follows the discipline. And again, I really suggest don't have the multi-fractioned out reps. Now, I have, because I've had churches that follow the letter of the law and I've let them do it. Now I got about 50 of my churches have that model, but not all do simplified. And not all 50 would do it the way I would suggest or recommend. So it may be legal, but it may not be work the best. You need to understand the model I shared with the all 9 and all that. This model's been road tested all over the country with thousands of churches at this point, and over 15 years worth of experience. There's some cases where you don't want to be creative doing your own thing. You can do some customization, sure, but you really, I'd say, lean on these experiences of these others throughout the country. Okay, I think I answered several of the questions on there. I'm going to talk about the finance hat a little bit, and I'll do some more. On the finance hat, you're in charge of budgeting and stewardship and audit stuff, and ensure finance secretary and treasurer compliance. Those are some of your financial duties. I also kind of want to remind you that, on that kind of budgeting and reporting, work with your treasurer to have some budget and reporting stuff that is good information that you need. Some of you, and then you can easily read. If you have to have a treasurer come into every meeting and walk you through it all, then the forms you have not been designed well. It should be designed, your forms, your budgets, your financials should be designed with enough clarity that anyone on the committee with some experience should be able to pick it up and read it. And if it needs notes, that's fine. But if it's really overly complicated, you probably need to have another conversation. There's also the reporting piece, working with the pastor, the finance secretary, treasurer, to provide financial reports. As I said, I would also say reporting to the church. How do you report the church your where you are in your finances? And then also partnering with if you know, it's kind of back to budgeting, uh, develop a stewardship plan that's going to work for year-round stewardship. So that's when you're wearing your finance hat and you do this fiduciary, that's all conversations to have. And don't wait until the fall or whenever your stewardship campaigns start talking about stewardship, talk about it year round. That's one of the nice things about having this one group in charge of everything is you get to have that work. Of course, on that, there is this fraud triangle. You may have seen it around. I learned about that. Todd Burris has used it and stuff. The reason we have all this, ensure this compliance, all that is, there has been situations, maybe some of y'all experienced it, where there has money's been taken and trust has been broken. We can't deal with the pressure that people handle money are going on in their personal life. The rationalization, some people can say, well, I'm kind of owed this or whatever. We can't fix that, but you can fix the opportunity piece. So part of your job as the board is to make sure, okay, we have counters that are non-related. We have a different person, non-family, that's the accounts receivable, accounts payable, finance secretary, treasurer. We're getting regular reports. Not just one person has access to the financials. I heard somewhere, we have a treasurer. No, he won't let anyone in the computer. My alarm bells are just going off when I hear stuff like that. That's just bad news all around. Any finance person worth their salt, if you say, hey, I have a question, should be able to say, sit down right here next to me and we'll do it right now. They should be willing to do that. And if they're not willing to do that, there's probably a much bigger conversation your board needs to have around how you're handling your money. This slide's in there, but so I'm not going to read it or anything. There are ways to do audits and stuff. Now, do I expect that board to sit down and do the audit itself? No, of course not. You may hire it outside. You may get a volunteer to help out and do a financial review that's not related to the board. And really, the board shouldn't be doing the audit themselves because they're the ones in charge of the money. So what you need is someone outside the board to be doing that financial review and come report to you. And you receive that audit or that financial review. And the small church think, man, an audit just sounds really big. There's a handbook the United Methodist Church has that will walk you through it. And if you can do 2 + 2 = 4, it walks you through the steps to do a financial review for a church. And so you can have 1 or 2 outside folks and they can do it. So all that is part of that financial hat. And when you wear that hat, my big suggestion is focus on stewardship. You're stewards of the church's assets. You're helping folks have a joy of generosity. Let's focus on stewardship, not scarcity. In other words, focus on growing the kingdom, not seeing where we can cut everything, and not trying to hold overly tight so no ministry is done. And that's part of the responsibility as a board. Now, the trustees hat. Let me talk a little bit about that, and then we'll take another break and talk about stuff. Now, I remember a church I served where we stopped the trustee meeting right in the middle of the meeting to go work on one of the toilets at the church. And the whole board of trustees walked into the men's restroom, and we all stared at the chair as he was getting a wrench out and working on the toilet. Now, here's the problem with that. That trustee chair, poor guy, we never let him off the board of trustees because he was the one guy who could fix stuff. But that was really a bad use of trustees because trustees are more about the briefcase than the toolbox. And when you have one board, they don't need to be involved in screwing in the light bulbs and fixing the stuff and all that. What I suggest, highly recommend, even if you decide not to simplify, is to have a building maintenance ministry team. There are certain people they're called in your church to wear a tool belt, and they don't need to be elected. They don't need to have a term of 3 years. They just love doing that stuff. So have a building maintenance team and give them a budget, give them boundaries, like you cannot remodel anything, you can only fix things, and let them do their work. And if they have a question, they can ask the board. If they need approval, they can ask the board. If they hit a finance spending limit, they can ask the board. Uh, and you have this ministry team that fixes the stuff. Now, of course, in some churches, you have a building maintenance staff. You want to be really careful if you have a team and a staff that think they have the same job. So that's a whole nother category. But my suggestion is go ahead right now and start that building maintenance team and let your trustees do trustee stuff like endowments, insurance, figuring out your 5-year HVAC replacement plan, doing your policies for your facility, a wedding policy, safe sanctuary, safe gatherings, accessibility, maintenance and remodeling plans. Because there's that parlor that has not been changed since the Ford administration. You know, doing stuff like that you need to do, you need to accomplish, like your long range plans and how you want to spend your budget and budget your money for maintenance and remodeling and all that. Uh, that's a huge difference when you think trustees and building maintenance team. It's different jobs. It's a different kind of giftedness. And the more you can separate out those responsibilities, the better. And that's one of the biggest differences on how a simplified accountable structure board works right there. You're not stopping your board meeting in the middle of it to go fix the toilet. So with the board of trustees hats, remember that all the church's stuff, the endowments, the facilities, that church van, that 15-passenger van, all the equipment, the sound equipment, all that's God's stuff for God's mission. And as board members that wear that trustee hat, what I'll say is you want stuff to wear out, right? You want stuff to wear out. You want to be replacing stuff. You want ministry to be happening in such a great level that you're going to have to replace things because God's ministry is happening. And so that's my encouragement for y'all as the board, because one of the nice things is I've served, I've been in churches, where the trustees thought their job was to make sure nothing ever got broken, nothing ever got worn out. And that meant not much ministry could happen, right? But since you're that simplified accountable structure board, you know that you're also the council and the staff parish, and you know that you get to have a global look over all the ministries and the work, the staffing, all these pieces working together. And you want stuff to wear out and need to get replaced. Now, oh, there we go. Again, I do want to say again, the piece on work teams, and I've got a whole set of slides around work teams. I'm not going to go through all these now, but you can download them. But these are, again, getting outside experts. I have some examples of work team projects, because that I've discovered, and really in Mission Possible 3, we really leaned heavily on work teams. I've discovered that if you deal more with drafts of stuff at the board meeting, that have already been processed, and you've involved a lot more voices in the creation of those drafts, the whole church feels invested in the work of the board. And these are just examples of that. Okay. There are a couple of challenges of a simplified accountable structure board. One of them is building in more communication. And so you need to have multiple communication streams. Over communicate, newsletter, town halls, all that stuff. Be real transparent. The second one is, I'm trying to think of the best way to frame this one. making sure you make decisions based upon your mission and not the latest trend, not the being pushed around by someone who thinks they know better, all that. You've been elected to a job to guide the church, to point the church, to steer the church where it needs to go. Accountability doesn't mean making everybody happy. Accountability is being accountable to the mission that God's given you to make disciples. So if you get distracted by the idea of our job's to make everybody happy, you'll be zigzagging all over the place. And because you're a smaller board without multiple committees to check and balance, it might be real easy to be pushed around. And that doesn't mean you bully back or anything. No, of course not. Of course not. But I think being really clear about why you're making your decisions and then articulating that why to the church. Okay, I've just gone through a heck of a lot of stuff. Again, I do have these books that have some of that, and I've had those websites. I'm going to answer some more questions, but first let me paste these. This website I'm about to send everybody is the this has the slides. It also will have this video. This one right here, I'm about to send you. It has a whole bunch of downloadables and kind of FAQs and all that kind of stuff. So you can just click those and open up that. Now, there's a few questions. One of them was, do you recommend bonding the treasurer? You may bond the treasurer if you wish, and there's actually a question about that in the discipline. However, most of your insurance policies with your umbrella policies, I think probably all of them, have an insurance coverage for emissions and executives and all that kind of stuff. So you probably have a highly insured work of your treasurer or financial secretary already built into your insurance. If we actually ask, is that in the charge conference paperwork, we actually ask, are they bonded or insured? Because it needs to be one or the other. If you'd like to do the bonding, that's a good question for your insurance agent. If that's better coverage, and that's an option. But if you're not insured, then you need to have them bonded. What other questions did we have? And I'm about to hit stop here on the let me first. I'll leave this up. Where was I? I'm gonna leave that up for a second. I'm gonna stop the recording. And we can see if there's any more questions.